Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is a screencast-o-matic presentation and recording that has us looking at popular misconceptions about Islam. Before we get started, please let me encourage you to open up to the correct part for today's lesson and to scroll down to the correct section. And remember, your task and goal for this section is to answer the key concept questions that happen to appear that correspond to this reading directly. So let's go ahead and get started, and let's learn more about the popular misconceptions that people hold towards Islam. Misconception number one is that Muslims are violent, terrorists, and/or extremists. This is the biggest misconception in Islam, no doubt resulting from the constant stereotyping and bashing the media gives Islam. When a gunman attacks a mosque in the name of Judaism, a Catholic IRA guerrilla sets off a bomb in an urban area, or Serbian Orthodox militiamen rape and kill innocent Muslim civilians, these acts are not used to stereotype an entire faith. Never are these acts attributed to the religion of the perpetrators. Yet, how many times have we heard the words Islamic, Muslim, fundamentalist, etc., linked with violence? Politics in so-called Muslim countries may or may not have any Islamic basis. Often dictators and politicians will use the name of Islam for their own purposes. One should remember to go to the source of Islam and separate what true religion of Islam says from what is portrayed in the media. Islam literally means submission to God, and is derived from a root word meaning peace. So Islam may seem exotic or even extreme in the modern world. Perhaps this is because religion doesn't dominate everyday life in the West, whereas Islam is considered a way of life for Muslims, and they make no division between secular and sacred in their lives. Like Christianity, Islam permits fighting in self-defense, in defense of religion, or in part of those who have been expelled forcibly from their homes. It lays down strict rules of combat which include prohibitions against harming civilians and against destroying crops, trees, and livestock. Nowhere does Islam enjoin the killing of innocents. The Quran says, "Fight in the cause of God against those who fight you, but do not transgress limits. God does not love transgressors. If they seek peace, then seek you peace. And trust in God, for He is the one that heareth and knoweth all things." War, therefore, is the last resort, and is subject to rigorous conditions laid down by the sacred law. The term jihad literally means struggle. Muslims believe that there are two kinds of jihad. The other jihad is the inner struggle of the soul, which everyone wages against egotistic desires for the sake of attaining inner peace. Misconception number two is that Islam oppresses women. The image of the typical Muslim woman wearing the veil and forced to stay home and forbidden to drive is all too common in most people's thoughts. Although some Muslim countries may have laws that oppress women, this should not be seen as coming from Islam. Many of these countries do not rule by any kind of Sharia law or Islamic law and introduce their own cultural standpoints on the issue of gender equity. Islam, on the other hand, gives men and women different roles, and of equity between the two is laid down in the Quran. And the example of the Prophet, peace be upon him, Islam sees a woman, whether single or married, as an individual in her own right, with the right to own and dispose of her property and earnings. A marriage gift is given by the groom to the bride for her own personal use, and she keeps her own family name rather than taking her husband's. Both men and women are expected to dress in a way that is modest and dignified. The messenger of God, peace be upon him, said, "The most perfect in faith amongst believers is he who is in best manner and kindness to his wife." So violence of any kind towards women and forcing them against their will for anything is not allowed. A Muslim marriage is a simple, legal agreement in which either partner is free to include conditions. Marriage customs thus vary widely from country to country. Divorce is not common, although it is acceptable as a last resort. According to Islam, a Muslim girl cannot be forced to marry against her will, and her parents simply suggest young men they think may be suitable. Let's move on to misconception number three. Muslims worship a different God. Allah is simply the Arabic word for God. Allah for Muslims is the greatest and most inclusive of the names of God. It is an Arabic word of rich meaning, denoting the one and the only God and ascribing no partners to him. It is exactly the same word in which the Jews in Hebrew use for God, Allah, and the word which Jesus Christ used in Aramaic when he prayed to God. God has an identical name in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and Allah is the same God worshipped by Muslims, Christians, and Jews. Muslims believe that Allah's sovereignty is to be acknowledged in worship and the pledge to obey his teaching and commandments, conveyed through his messengers and prophets who were sent at various times and many places throughout history. However, it should be noted that God in Islam is one and only. He, the Exalted, does not get tired, does not have a son, Jesus, or have associates, nor does he have human-like attributions as found in other faiths. Misconception number 4. Islam was spread by the sword and intolerant of other faiths. And Islam, in many ways, is definitely not that. But let's just go ahead and talk about this misconception right now. Many social studies textbooks for students show the image of Arab horsemen carrying a sword in one hand and the Quran in the other, conquering and forcibly converting. This, though, is not a correct portrayal of history. Islam has always given respect and freedom of religion to all faiths, and the Quran says God forbids you not, with regards to those who fight you, not for your faith, nor drive you out from your homes, from dealing kindly and justly with them, for God loveth those who are just. So freedom of religion is laid down in the Quran itself. There is no compulsion or coercion in the religion. The right direction is distinctly clear from the error. Christian missionary T.W. Arnold had this opinion of his study of the question of the spread of Islam, of any organized attempt to force the acceptance of Islam on the non-Muslim population, or of any systematic persecution intended to stamp out the Christian religion. We hear nothing. Had the caliphs chosen to adopt either course or action, they might have swept away Christianity as easily as Ferdinand and Isabella drove Islam out of Spain, or Louis XIV made Protestantism. It is a function of Islamic law to protect the privileged status of minorities, and this is why non-Muslim places of worship have flourished all over the Islamic world. History provides many examples of Muslim tolerance towards other faiths. When the Caliph Omar entered Jerusalem in the year 634, Islam granted freedom of worship to all religious communities in the city, proclaiming to the inhabitants that their lives and property were safe and that their places of worship would never be taken from them. He asked the Christian patriarch Sophronis to accompany him to visit all of the holy places. Islamic law also permits non-Muslim minorities to set up their courts, which implement family laws drawn up by minorities themselves, and the life and property of all citizens in an Islamic state are considered sacred, whether the person is Muslim or not. So racism is not a part of Islam, and the Quran speaks only of human equality and how all peoples are equal in the sight of God. O mankind, we created you from a single soul, male and female, and made you into nations and tribes, so you may come to know one another. Surely the most honored of you in God's sight is the greatest of you in piety. God is all-knowing, all-aware. Let's move on to the final misconception for today, that all Muslims are Arabs. These terms might cause some confusion, so here we go. The Muslim population of the world is around 1.2 billion. 1 out of 5 people in the world is a Muslim. They are a vast range of races, nationalities, and cultures from around the globe. From the Philippines to Nigeria, they are united by their common Islamic faith. But only about 18% live in the Arab world, and the largest Muslim community is in Indonesia. Most Muslims live in east of Pakistan. 30% of Muslims live in the Indian subcontinent, 20% in sub-Saharan Africa, 17% in Southeast Asia, 18% in the Arab world, 10% in the Soviet Union, and China. Turkey, Iran, and Afghanistan make up 10% of the non-Arab Middle East, and although there are common Muslim minorities in almost every area, including Latin America and Australia, they are most numerous in Russia and its newly independent states, India and Central Africa too. There are about 6 million Muslims in the United States as well. So we should note here that that is, in fact, the real reality of Islam and practicing Muslims all throughout the world. So guys, with knowing what we know now, hopefully we can approach understanding Islam with a little bit more of a truer sense of what this religion is and what the people are who worship it so devoutly. Thank you very much for tuning in, and good luck with completing the rest of your lesson.